Welcome to National Parks Traveler, where we explore the national parks and the issues that involve them.
It's fair to say that the nation's public lands, those managed by the National Park Service, the Bureau of Land Management, the U.S. Forest Service, and other federal land managing agencies, are at risk under the Trump administration. There's no hyperbole in that statement if you pay attention to what the administration already has done in terms of downsizing those agencies' workforces, and when you listen to Interior Secretary Doug Burgum say he wants to open more public lands to energy development and mining, and even for sale. This is Kurt Repenchek, your host at the National Parks Traveler. Federal lands in the United States are owned by all Americans, but at various times over the years, there have been efforts to wrench those lands away from the government to give to the states or to sell off. Walt Dabney, who spent his professional career protecting public lands during his decades-long stint with the National Park Service and then as director of the Texas State Park System, now is working to educate Americans about their vested interest in those lands and what could be lost if Congress or the White House tries to get rid of them. We'll be back in a minute with Walt to discuss exactly what is at risk and what you can do.
Acadia National Park is one of the 10 most popular national parks in the United States. It's also one of the smallest and most vulnerable. That's why Friends of Acadia exists. Friends of Acadia is an independent organization of passionate people inspiring those who love this magnificent park to make a real and lasting difference for Acadia. You can make a difference at friendsofacadia.org. The Blue Ridge Parkway Foundation is the primary nonprofit fundraising partner for the Blue Ridge Parkway. It is made up of people who have a deep love for this majestic road and want to ensure that its natural beauty and the experiences it offers endure for generations to come. Show your appreciation at brpfoundation.org. Smokey's Life. Full of stunning photography and thought-provoking reads, Smokey's Life Journal is a biannual magazine produced by Smokey's Life, formerly the Great Smoky Mountains Association. Members receive it free of charge each spring and fall, and it is available for purchase in retail stores throughout Great Smoky Mountains National Park and online at smokieslife.org. Washington's National Park Fund is the official philanthropic partner serving Mount Rainier, North Cascades, and Olympic National Parks. WNPF raises funds for scientific research, youth experiences, volunteer programs, and projects that preserve and protect these national parks in Washington state. Learn how you can help at WNPF.org. Support from readers and listeners like you make the National Parks Traveler possible every day of the year. If you enjoy the Traveler's content, please consider a donation at nationalparkstraveler.org.
Hi, Walt. Welcome to the Traveler.
Well, thank you. It's great to be with you, Kurt.
Appreciate your making time for us. I mean, you have got a long resume of service to public lands. You worked for the National Park Service for a long time, and then you ran Texas State Park System for quite a while. How far back do you go?
Well, I started with the Park Service while I was still at Texas A&M in the School of Recreation and Park Administration. And I got selected as one of 6 student trainees out of Texas A&M. We had to take the Federal Service Entrance exam in those days, and somehow I got past it. And I got sent I didn't have any idea. I got sent to Yellowstone, to Old Faithful District of Yellowstone as a park naturalist. I wasn't even sure exactly what that was. And
that was your first job at the Park Service?
That was my first job, and that was the summer of 1969. And by the time that summer was over, I went, my gosh, this is incredible. I can do this for a living. And so I went back and finished A&M and then spent 30 years with the NPS all over the country.
What was your degree in?
In Recreation and Park Administration.
Okay.
I think I was the first undergraduate student in the new Department of Recreation and Parks at A&M. And that was because I was absolutely looking for a new home, as they were going to dump me out of engineering, which I clearly was never going to be one. And Dr. Reed at the department threw me a lifeline, and it was just incredible. You never know in life what the hell turns you're going to take and where it's going to lead you. And it was just so fortunate.
You know, there are Park Service personnel who for years longed to get a job in Yellowstone, and that was your first introduction to the Park Service. That's you were in the right place at the right time.
Well, and you're right, and I don't take that for granted. I had a couple of really interesting things that happened during my career that, I didn't plan. They just happened. And again, you come to a fork in the road, and sometimes it's clear what to do, and other times you just go for it. And you ever hear of Freeman Tilden?
Yes, sir.
I had my orders to go to Fort Benning, Georgia for infantry officer school in 1970. Supposed to be there in February. And in January, I get a letter from the Park Service. This is after I had been a student trainee, or I was still a student trainee, but I'd finished my time in Yellowstone, and I think that went okay. And this letter said, as a student trainee, Park Service has a special assignment for you, and that's to be an aide to Freeman Tilden.
Wow.
And I knew who Freeman Tilden was from Texas A&M interpretation class, but I didn't know anything about him. And I sent him a note back, or called him, whatever, I don't remember now, it's 50-something years ago. And I said, I'm sorry, that sounds interesting, but I've got my orders to Fort Benning, Georgia. And they said, send us a copy of that. And I went, what the hell for? 2 weeks later, I get a letter from the Department of the Army saying your reporting date to Fort Benning is postponed for 1 year at the request of the National Park Service. So I reported to D.C., met Freeman Tilden down at St. Augustine at the Castillo de San Marcos, walked in and met this 86-year-old guy. I was 23, and I kind of went, oh my God, what did I just get into?
Well, and for those listeners who don't know Freeman Tilden, he is the prototype interpreter for the Park Service, no?
I do a program on Freeman Tilden now, which you would really enjoy, Kurt. It's called Travels with Freeman. And probably 10 years ago, NAI, the National Association of Interpretation, asked me if I would come to their annual meeting and do a keynote talk on Freeman Tilden. Not what is interpretation, but who was Freeman Tilden? And I thought, oh man, that was at the time 47 years before. And I said, I need to get back to you. So I went and dug out these 3 big government journals that I had handwritten every night after Freeman and I had spent the day together. And there's a lot of great stories in this whole thing. I called him back and I said, I'll do it. And so I put this program together, a PowerPoint program that they videoed, and I'll send you a copy. It's just called Travels with Freeman by Walt Dabney, and it was on Vimeo, but I'll send you the link. And I've since given that half a dozen times. This guy was a fascinating individual. This was like, for me, in retrospect, it was like some dumb kid running around for a year with Plato or Aristotle. I mean, I learned so much. He and I became really good friends. And I ended up, and I just say this matter of factly, I knew more about Freeman Tilden than his own family did. And we roomed together at a lady's house in Harpers Ferry. We had offices on the Harpers Ferry campus. We traveled, and he got a room and I got a room, and every night we'd eat dinner in his room, which was very simple fare. I tell that story. And we would talk about everything. And anyway, that's all captured in that. But he had an entire life and history as a very successful writer with peers and colleagues that he knew well, like H.L. Mencken and O. Henry. And in 1941, he got enticed by Newton Drury to come to the Park Service to help with the interpretation program. And he quit what he was doing and started a new career at the age of 58 or 60. He wrote Interpreting Our Heritage at the age of 72
Hmm.
after going down and leading tours at the Castillo de San Marcos to figure out what interpretation was. It changed what I think about a lot of things.
Did it keep you out of the Army?
Oh, no, no. I went back. No, no, no. I went back and went to infantry officer school. By then, yes and no. No, it didn't keep me out of the Army, but the timing was such, and I didn't have any idea at the time. The timing was such that by the time I graduated from the infantry school, they weren't sending any more junior grade combat officers to Vietnam. They were
Hmm.
pulling them out and they were dumping lieutenants and captains right and left. And they gave me the chance of going and doing garrison duty at Fort Polk or Fort Leonard Wood or going back to the Park Service and going on reserves. And so that's what I did.
Huh. Well, listen, we're going to jump around a little bit, but if I forget, remind me. I was going to ask you more about Freeman Tilden and his heritage and what he left the Park Service with. But so you started, you spent that year at Yellowstone, and then you went back and finished your college degree, and then you spent some time with Freeman Tilden. Park Service people seem to jump around all over the place as time goes by. Did you have a crooked course across the country with the Park Service?
Well, I went back to, after the Army, I went back to Harper's Ferry and got assigned eventually. I was kind of stuck there. I got assigned eventually to go to Yosemite in the summer of 1971. That was the year after the big riots occurred in Stoneman Meadow in the summer of 1970. And I ended up getting permanent assignment in Yosemite, and they brought in a whole crew of new young rangers that they thought could talk to these young people that were very upset about all kinds of things, including the Vietnam War. And anyway, they sent me to the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center, and I learned my basic ranger skills there. I was a law enforcement officer, a structural and wildland firefighter, search and rescue guy, did a lot of bear work, a lot of trapping and tagging black bears. And when they sent me to diving school because of body rescues, people going over the waterfalls and hitting in the plunge pools. And and so I learned those skills there. Then after 4 years, I got a call. You didn't even put in for stuff in those days. You
Hmm.
didn't know you were being considered. I got a call to be the district ranger at Paradise at Mount Rainier. And I went into the chief and I said, "Boss, I don't want to leave here. I love this place." He said, "Unless you have a really good reason, you need to go." And I went, and it was an absolute fabulous experience. I learned glacial mountaineering. I went to EMT school. The law enforcement load there wasn't nearly any, it was almost non-existent compared to Yosemite. Rescues, there were rescues, but not as many as Yosemite. And so I really got to focus on other aspects of it, which was just wonderful. And after almost 4 years there, I got an offer to come to Grand Tetons as a South District Ranger in the Tetons, based out of Moose, Wyoming, and was there for 4.5 years. And then did something I said I'd never ever do, and that's go east of the Mississippi, because I didn't think real rangers would go east of the Mississippi. I was a mountain ranger. And I ended up going as the chief of resource management to Everglades National Park, which you
Ooh.
talk about a difference. Rock Reef Pass in the Everglades is elevation 4 feet.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'd been on top of the Grand Teton several times. Anyway, I had a blast there. And, that among other things in that job, I had responsibility for the fire program in Everglades, and it was the oldest prescribed fire program in America. It was actually managed and planned. I think it started in 1947, and we burned thousands of acres of Everglades every year. But that's a very different environment, obviously, than burning forests, because you're burning mostly grasslands, marshlands. Anyway, I did another thing I said I'd absolutely never do. And that's ended up going to Washington, D.C. And I was in there as the chief ranger for the National Park Service for 5.5 years. And I absolutely loved it. Put all my staff in uniform, which most of the people in D.C. are in a coat and tie. We're not going to run the Ranger Activities Office here with coats and ties. We're gonna be in the National Park Service uniform. And that really served me well in a number of cases. I ended up testifying before Congress more than a half a dozen times. A lot of that related to Yellowstone being on fire. And I had, among other things, the Wildland Fire Program. I managed the Boise operation for the Park Service, as well as ranger activities. And so I spent a lot of time on evening news or morning news, Nightline and Night Watch and Good Morning America and things like that, trying to explain what the hell was going on in Yellowstone and why we couldn't put it right out. And anyway, after that, I got an offer to go to Utah as the group superintendent for the Southeast Utah group, which is Canyonlands, Arches, Natural Bridges, and we eventually added the National Monument of Hovenweep. And so those 4 parks, and that was a magical place. I was there for 8 years when Texas then called, and I'm from Texas, so maybe it was because I spoke fluent Texan, I don't know. But, they said, we need you to come here. It's a mess. And a friend of mine who was the state parks director in Utah called me when I took that job, and he said, do you have a clue what you're getting into? And I went, sure, it's running parks. He said, okay. Well, he called me in about 3 months and he said, well, I said, I did not have a clue. I clearly did not have a clue. It was almost a third world operation. And so for the next almost, almost 11 and a half years, I was the director there. And we really went to whipping and spurring and got a whole lot of things done. But it was daunting for a long time. We put together a great team, and I look back on it as absolutely an amazing ending of my career. And again, as you and I talked about at the beginning, I didn't have some detailed plan, Kurt, about where I was going. Doors open, and I went, hell, I'll try that. And, I'm a firm believer that you can be happy or sad or miserable wherever you are, and it's your choice. And so I always went looking at, okay, I'm going to Everglades. There aren't any mountains to climb. And if that's your goal, you're going to be extremely frustrated. But there was so many things that were new to me, and everything from diving in at Biscayne and raising a cannon to learning from a fruit stand on the roadside how you cut a mango open and dice it and put lemon on it to where you would eat it just right out of the skin. And so, I mean, every place you go, your goal should be to enjoy what's there and do the best you can and learn everything that you possibly can.
Yeah, I think I've been to that fruit stand a couple years ago. It's quite the fruit stand, that's for sure. So, Walt, since 2018, you've been running a website and a campaign, America's Public Lands, americaspubliclands.com. Why did you launch that?
Well, as I told you earlier, I was 11 and a half years almost as the director of state parks, then spent another year and a half in Texas. Again, Texas is home. When I was growing up, my granddad had a ranch. That ranch in about 1983 was sold. He had passed away, and my mother and her siblings needed to sell it, and they did. So I didn't have that. In Texas, other than the park system and some national park areas that were actually bought up to make national parks from ranches, and a little bit of Forest Service area, 96% of Texas is privately owned land. And I had lived in the West most of my career. I spent 8 years in Moab, Utah, and I could get on a mountain bike or put it on my car and in 10 minutes be up on great trails. or throw my muzzle loader over my shoulder up in the LaSalle Mountains and walk till I couldn't walk anymore, hunting elk and deer, which I did many times, a number of those years. And you can't do that in the places that don't have the public lands left. It's just, you're going to have to pay some private landowner a lot of money to do the kind of things that we take for granted out west. And I get back to Moab. We moved back to Moab, Utah, and I'm hearing people say, isn't it a shame that these lands all around us are locked up by the federal government? I went, locked up? Hell, I go use them all the time. I don't see what you're talking about. And the Utah was promised when it became a state that these lands would be returned, would be given back to them. And I'm thinking, man, I need to go study my history a little bit, because I thought Utah was carved out of the public lands. I didn't know they ever owned all this. And then, or the Constitution does not allow for the federal government to own land. So I said, and then there was a lot of talk. We need to get these lands transferred out of public ownership, common ownership. And when somebody says they're federal lands, that means, Kurt, that you and I and all the rest of the Americans own them. They're ours and we can use them. Are there any rules and regulations? Yes. But those are not very onerous in most cases. And compared to it being fenced and posted as private land, they're nothing. And so I started putting this program together. I'd research and finally, I guess in about in 2018, I put this PowerPoint together, and the League of Women Voters asked me to present it at the library in Moab, Utah, and I did. And it was a packed house, and people said and I had people in that room that had been their whole career in the BLM or Forest Service or Park Service, and they come up afterwards and say, damn, I didn't know a bunch of that. And of course, I'll tell this group here that a lot of it I didn't know when I started researching it. So I put this together, and over the last going on 9 years, I've done it. It'll be probably 13 states, and I don't know how many dozens and dozens of times in person I've done it. I don't do this as a business. I don't get paid to do this. It's a pretty damn expensive hobby at times. I'm kind of a traveling preacher, itinerant at that, but I'm very committed to it. Anyway, I'd be doing these presentations, and somebody at the end of the thing would say, "What about this?" And I went, "I don't know, and I won't tell you if I don't know. But I'm gonna go research that." And I am going to add that to my program. So the program has evolved over time. And that's been really good. I love to do the in-person thing. It's now been professionally recorded and videoed and illustrated. It's on my website and it's on YouTube. And I hope people will look at it, because it really gives you the full history of how we got these places, how states were formed, what does the Constitution say, what do statehood acts say? And one of the things I tell people at every time, there is nothing in this presentation that is not factual and historically accurate. And if you ever see anything in here that you think is not, you call my attention to it. And if I'm wrong, I will absolutely fix it, because I'm not spreading anything that isn't true. And in going on 9 years, that has never happened one time. Because I'm going to make sure it's true. And I invite them. Anything I tell you in here, you can confirm yourself. If you have the ability to read and use the internet a little bit, you can run this all down. For example, if you want to know what the agreement was with Congress when you became a state, wherever you are, Wyoming, Colorado, Nevada, go read your Statehood Enabling Act. This is what the territory agreed to when they became a state. And in the case of Utah, who said we were promised a statehood to get our lands back, it says unequivocally that you do not claim any further right to any of those lands, and no more of those lands are going to be given to you in the future. But a third section of that says, if any lands are sold subsequent to statehood after the cost of the sale, the state, Colorado, Utah, Wyoming, wherever you are, would get 5% of the net, and the federal government would get 95% of the net. And if it went out to bid, I at least probably wouldn't be the highest bidder, so it would be gone for me to ever use, and it would in fact be gone and we'd never get it back. So those are the kind of things. How are the parks established? How are the forests established? The efforts to transfer these lands, some discussion of multiple use. Anyway, I think it's a good tutorial on your public lands. And you as a public landowner, you're at a serious disadvantage when the people that are trying to transfer these lands out of our common ownership come in and start spewing things that sound like, oh my gosh, really? No, it's not really. They're making stuff up and they're very good at it and they're well funded and that kind of thing. And they've got an agenda that is not dealing with your interests.
Now, of course, back in the 1970s and the early 1980s, we saw the Sagebrush Rebellion, which kind of started in Utah. The same kind of thing that, these are our lands, they shouldn't be federal lands. And somehow Ronald Reagan put down that rebellion of sorts. Is that what we're seeing now? I mean, as you mentioned, Utah is trying to get BLM lands. There's a movement in Congress to allow the federal government to sell federal lands, and Interior Secretary Doug Burgum has even mentioned that, saying that we can maybe sell some of these lands to communities for housing, and of course there's always the fear that he's going to sell them to mining or oil and gas development. Is there any kind of relationship between what went on during the Sagebrush Rebellion and what we're seeing now?
You can sell them to mining or operations, or you can sell them to very wealthy people, which is more likely, because after 150 years of exploring these lands looking for minerals or oil and gas, they know where most of that is already right now. The reason these lands are still there and were never claimed is they're arid. As you move from east to west across developing and claiming lands or buying lands from the government when it was disposing of lands, the good lands, the lands that could be farmed or ranched, were claimed first or bought first. By the time they got past the 100th meridian, which runs up about I-35 through Texas, the Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska, and the Dakotas, all the way to the Sierra Nevadas, it would not, except along riparian areas, sustain agriculture. It has less than 20 inches of annual rainfall, and without irrigation, you can't make that work. So what was left has been mined and drilled and so forth, but it would be bought, I think, primarily by private individuals, and then the rest of us would be excluded from that. And the rest of your question, Kurt, was?
Is there connections?
The continuum from the Sagebrush Rebellion, it's some of the same people exactly. And their goal, I think some of them, if they watch that video, would understand, whoa, wait a minute. For example, a lot of these were based on grazing. And if you look at the grazing issue alone, if you were to transfer the lands in Utah, first of all, some of that effort goes back to 2012 when the Utah legislature passed the Transfer of Public Lands Act, and it wasn't 18.5 million, which is what the BLM is. It was 31.5 million acres, which included all Forest Service non-wilderness, all the BLM, all the Grand Staircase Escalante, all of Glen Canyon on the Utah side of the Colorado River for 31 million acres. And the state could keep it or sell it. And they had to do that by 2014. Well, that wasn't binding on the federal government, and it didn't go anyway, but it shows the intent of it. And anyway, it's the same. It's the same philosophy. It's some of the same people. It's a continuum of that whole effort. And taking grazing, like I said, if you're a public land grazer in Utah this year, for example, the cost to you to rent non-irrigated pasture land from a private individual in Utah, that's no irrigation, you're just buying range from them, is about $18 an AUM. And an AUM is an animal unit month, which is a cow calf, a horse, 5 sheep, or 5 goats for 1 month grazing. The state rate on blocked up pieces of state land is $11.66. So if you're somebody that needs to go rent somebody else's ground, either private or state, similar kinds of non-irrigated ground, you're paying about $17 or $11.66, and the federal government's rate is $1.35, which is completely ridiculous. And without arguing about whether you ought to graze or not, you ought to at least index the federal rate to whatever the state charges for the same kind of land. Then it would be fair to everybody, because if you're a rancher and you have to rent private ground or you have to rent state land, and your competition, because all your other costs, vet, supplemental feeding, hauling water, rounding them up, hauling them, all that kind of thing, those costs are basically the same. But if you're grazing for $1.35 as opposed to $11.66, you got a serious advantage over your competition. So make that fair, and then you don't have to argue whether you ought to graze or not. If it makes sense to you legal or economically, do it. If it doesn't, then don't do it. So some of the same people, and if the lands got transferred, number one, the state couldn't possibly pay to take care of them. One fire season would wipe out most state budgets, and they would have to raise the price for every single thing that you do on public land.
Yeah, and speaking to the grazing rate, Interior Secretary Burgum wants to lower it even farther, which is kind of interesting. But, you say that's a lot of the same people. Of course, William Perry Pendley, who wrote the chapter in Project 25, that conservative manifesto for the Republican presidency. Perry Pendley used to run the Mountain States Legal Foundation, which butted heads quite a few times with the federal government over multiple use in lands.
That's true. And, the only way you're going to stop this, which would be an irreversible tragedy in my view, to lose these lands out of our common ownership, lose our access to them, is for you to make it clear to your congressional delegation. And the president, no president, can just dispose of the public lands. Federal Land Policy Management Act of 1976 makes it very clear. Congress stopped all disposal of public lands, but it provided something. You ask about housing. It provided an administrative framework that if something makes sense around a town or something, if the boundary needs to be adjusted or whatever, there can be a land trade or swap or whatever makes sense, but you go through a process. This wholesale selling of everything would be absolutely horrible. The good thing about this, to me, politically, is while it is truly political, if you're a four-wheel drive user, a backcountry horseman, a fisherman, a hunter, a mushroom collector, a firewood cutter, a river runner, a mountain biker, a backpacker, a hiker, a peak bagger, whatever you are from every possible political background. You just use and love these lands. And once people understand they're under threat, you go to Texas, all the four-wheel drive stuff. I tried down there a long time as director of Texas State Parks with a grant program to find a place for four-wheel drive enthusiasts to be able to use their machines. It's all private land. And we would negotiate. We were going to pay landowners, ranch landowners, to let people come in and use their ranch roads, rough old ranch roads, for their four-wheel drive adventures. And about the time we would have a deal struck, the neighbors would find out they're going to have four-wheel drive vehicles next door on the next ranch, which could be thousands of acres, the next ranch, and they'd give their neighbor hell, and every one of those fell through. And so that's why, whether it's hunting or fishing or four-wheel drive use or pack stock use in the backcountry, people are coming from lots of places like my home state of Texas to places like Colorado and Idaho and Montana and Wyoming, because they can come out here and do the stuff they love and go back to their home, but they can't do it at home. There's just no place to go do that sort of thing. So if these lands go away, we're all dinked, and these people, once they understand that this is under threat, they do not want to lose these. And, a lot of these red Western states, and one of the things just came up that I was very skeptical of was that there's a bill co-sponsored by Gabe Vasquez from New Mexico and Ryan Zinke from Montana, and it's called the Keep Public Lands in Public Hands Act. And I read it about 4 times, and I went, something's wrong here, because I don't think Mr. Zinke would buy into this. Well, it turns out he very much has bought into it, and the only reason that would be true is look how many people in Montana use those lands every damn day. Look how many of them are guides and outfitters or sell things around places like Yellowstone and in the other Park Service and Forest Service and BLM areas in their state. And so they don't want to lose them. And, Wyoming State has 600,000 people. If you turn those 30 million acres of federal land, other than Yellowstone, which is what they propose, turn them all but Yellowstone over to them, you got to staff them and take care of them and fight the fires and all that kind of thing. And the federal government's out of it. Instead of 335 million people paying for it, 600,000 are going to have to pay for it.
Sure. But I have to ask you, sir, there have been polls and surveys of the American public across the country, as well as specific to the Western states. Colorado College for 15 years has been polling Westerners on their attitudes towards public lands and oil and gas and energy drilling. And all those polls overwhelmingly show that Americans do not want to sell, don't want to see their public lands sold. They'd like to see more public lands. They'd like to see more national monuments created. And yet there was that bill that you just mentioned by Mr. Zinke and Mr. Vasquez. The Senate was asked to endorse it, and the Senate failed to do that, indicating at least some interest to sell public lands. The Interior Secretary has said he wants to sell public lands. What is it going to take to get them to realize the public doesn't want to sell public lands?
I said it a while ago, it's on my website too, that the most effective thing you can do is call your congressional delegation. Make it absolutely clear to them. Phone calls are probably the best. A letter is probably next best. They log every phone call and as to what the subject is and what your position was. And that's very effective. But they need to know unequivocally that people don't support that. Give you an example, Kurt. I don't remember the date this happened. It was before, maybe I was in Texas then after I'd left the Park Service. A guy named Jason Chaffetz was a congressman.
From Utah. And he introduced a bill. I don't remember the exact numbers, but it was 2,000 or 3,000 or 4,000 acres that probably, if you and I sat down and looked at the specific proposal, it was housekeeping, probably some disjunct pieces of land here or there, straightening a boundary out, doing some land swaps and so forth. He had to pull that bill in 3 or 4 days. He got such a cacophony of phone calls, not from the Sierra Club and the SUAs of this world, because he probably didn't care about them, but from hunters and fishermen and four-wheel drive users that said, basically, what in the hell are you thinking about? Because they don't want to lose these lands. And if they know they're under threat, I think telling your friends, hey, you need to get in on this. You and I go camping. There's families in the West who are generations of having used the public lands. Their families have gone out to the same
spot year after year to camp in the summer or to set up a hunt camp in the fall or to go to their favorite fishing spot and spend time up there. And they took their kids and they took their grandkids and all that. And they're again from every possible political background or perspective. They went up to cut their firewood in the fall, chasing mushrooms after a good wet season, and all the other things people do up there and just want to do. So I think if we can get the word out and we make it clear this is a non-starter for Congress, don't even think about doing this. And again, I don't think if Zinke didn't believe that the people up there would really be upset if this proposal was to go forward. I think that's what he's talking about. Plus, I think he probably uses and enjoys these lands himself.
He does. He does. Now, we're talking about public lands, and you have to talk about the agencies that manage the public lands, the Park Service, the U.S. Forest Service, the Bureau of Land Management. And you could say they are under attack as well. As the Trump administration tries to downsize federal government, there have been, some would say, drastic, decimating cuts to the workforce at all those agencies. The Park Service, I believe, has lost roughly 2,500 people, or almost 13% of the entire Park Service workforce, either through direct firings or the fork in the road, retire now and we'll pay you through the end of the year, or resignations. We've seen DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, talk about closing Park Service facilities across the country. The facility at Harpers Ferry that does such great work with cultural and historical artifact restorations and preservations. The Moab office of the National Park Service. It's hard to imagine closing that and forcing people out. I said earlier that I was going to come back to Freeman Tilden, and I believe that also they're talking about closing the centers at Harpers Ferry and at Grand Canyon, the Horace Albright Center, where new rangers, new Park Service employees go through and learn more about the National Park Service and learn who Freeman Tilden was. All this, looking at your career in the Park Service and Texas parks has to be greatly disturbing.
I'm pretty sure this is true, Kurt. I think if I went back to Yosemite, we had more people in the early 70s than Yosemite has now. I had as many, of course, it was a rough time. I had as many as 15 rangers or so working at night on the night shift, and we were losing our tail. And the agencies, the National Park Service, for example, was pretty stagnant, at least, if not lower per site than they used to be.
Personnel-wise.
And the visitation last year, for example, set a record, all-time record of 339 million visits to the park system. If your staff is struggling to even keep up, keeping the entrance station open, trying to keep the lines, we already have lines at terrible situations trying to get in parks like Arches and Zion and places like that, Yellowstone. And you go in and keeping bathrooms. When I was in Texas, we had parks that were busy like a lot of these I just named. You had a restroom crew. I don't know, however many, 6, 8 restrooms you got. They would start at restroom number 1, and by the time they can't clean number 8 and came back to number 1 in the same day, it was like they'd never been there. They were totally trashed. Well, if you don't have the staff to do that, you are going to have a damned mess. And that's going to go all over the place. If they have to roll up to these gates and instead of 4 entrance stations like Zion has, they've got 1 or 2 open, and you sit there for 3 hours with your engine running and the kids getting upset trying to get in there, people are going to get upset. If you go in the visitor center to ask questions and the line is out the damn door because there's 1 or 2 people trying to handle this horde of people that are coming in there that need to know things, need to know where to go, where to do whatever, I think it's really going to break down. We have the preeminent park system in the world. We were the example that began national park systems, starting with Yellowstone in March of 1872 when President Grant signed that bill. Yellowstone was the first place in the world a big landscape-sized place that was not set aside for royalty or seriously wealthy people. It was set aside, and if you look at the entrance gate at Gardner on the north end of Yellowstone, it says for the benefit and enjoyment of the people. And it was not for special folks. So we've built on that. We now have almost 500 areas in the national park system, all kinds of classifications. Our visitation, like I said, now is 339 million people. It is the repository for the special natural places that we have, like the Yellowstones and Yosemites and the Redwoods and the Grand Canyon, some of which are unique in the world. We just happen to have them, and we hold them, I think, in trust for the entire world. And if you look at the visitation coming from overseas to come to these places, it's pretty clear that's the case. It's also the repository of those prehistoric and historic places that make us who we are as Americans. And so the natural and historic places that we have in this system really represent who we are. And in addition, they're an absolute economic gold mine. The cost of the National Park Service's full operations is about $3.5 billion, and they generate about $58 billion a year in economic activity across the nation. And a lot of that, a whole lot of that, Kurt, is in rural America. And much of that is in states that rurally went largely red, but you've got lots of people that are guides, outfitters, restaurant owners, gift shop owners, tire store owners, camping gear owners, all those kind of things around these parks that are totally dependent on those places going. And so if you got $3.5 billion in seed money and it's generating $58 billion, even if you philosophically don't give a damn about these places, it is absolutely stupid economics to cut them to where they can't function right. And if they continue the way they're doing, there's a way, if it made sense somewhere, to reduce an operation, but you go through systematically and look at every piece of it. And if you remove this, and I could talk a long time on this, you don't have that time, but you do it systematically. You don't bring a bunch of people that probably never even been in a damn national park in and set them down and said, reduce this by this amount of money, and they go through and they're just chopping heads off of a position that's going to remove this amount of money with no clue what that person does, what the function of that job is, how that job relates to other people being able to do their job. And pretty soon you got a totally dysfunctional situation here. And when people start finding that out, they're going to be furious and they're going to be disappointed. The Park Service and park employees, if you look at the rankings of favorability in polls about government services, has always ranked 1 or 2 or 3 in the nation. And I think this is really a disaster in so many ways. Since we established our park system, over 100 nations around the world have established park systems. And it's a wonderful idea. It's an economic windfall. And we're just going down a absolutely dead-end road.
Again, your website, americaspubliclands.com, people can go there and learn a lot about the history of public lands and how they were formed and the various states' rights and the federal government's rights as far as ownership. On that website, you mention a social media campaign. What's that all about?
Well, 2 things. It's America's Public Land. Land.com. It won't come up right if you do the other. And social media, I encourage people, as I said, I give them some examples of what a letter might include. You need to put it in your own words. If you're not real comfortable on the telephone, here's a little bit of script. Make it simple and straightforward. And I give you some examples of what you might write down to be able to talk from. But getting involved like that is critically important. Taking something like this website and sharing it with other people. If you look at that website now, we've added the guy that was not paid by me, but paid by Canyonlands Natural History Association to professionally record and illustrate this program, is now helping me on his own. He just got so enthused about this whole issue and what we're trying to do. And we've gone through and taken that big, long program and chopped it into some smaller pieces that you can share on social media and so forth if somebody's got a question. But getting on some of these frameworks, Instagram and TikTok and so forth that the young people are on, and spreading the word. Again, the bottom line is the American public landowner, which is all of us, needs to know there's people trying to take these lands away from us, and you need to personally get involved. And if all you can do is make that phone call or share the website and the videos with your friends so that they know what's going on, and especially if we can get congressional staffers, Kurt, to maybe watch this video, because they're getting bombarded with people out there that are spouting all kinds of things that are not true. And if you don't know what is true, some of it sounds kind of real, and it's totally not. And so if somebody says we want our lands back, those lands never were theirs. They were carved out of the federal lands from a territory. And so one after another, the Constitution says unequivocally, Congress has the ability to make all needful rules and decisions related to the territory and other property of the United States. Go read the property clause of the U.S. Constitution. Very clear. And so if Congress has that authority, the only way you stop that is for your representatives and senators to know you don't want these lands lost.
That's Walt Dabney. He spent his professional career serving the public lands with the National Park Service and then the Texas State Park System, which he directed. Walt, I really appreciate your time today. It's a very informative program that you have on your website, americaspublicland.com, and we're going to work to spread the word as well. Any closing thoughts you have?
No, I've watched so many people come into these places over the years. And for example, that whole thing I said about rural America benefiting, Grand County, Utah, where I lived for a total of about 15 or 16 years, has a population of about 8,000 people in Grand County, 5 plus in Moab City. You know what the visitation is every year? And most of these people are not coming to see Aunt Mildred or to buy something at Milt's hamburger stand. They are coming there because of the national parks. And then they find out they have all of these lands around there, the BLM and the Forest Service, where they can also go. And if they're coming from other places in the world, they cannot believe they can go out there and somebody isn't going to get mad or lock them up. They don't have that anywhere else. Anyway, population of 8,000 people, 3 million people come to Grand County every year. Unbelievable. Outdoor recreation set according to the Department of Commerce Bureau of Economic Analysis in 2024, outdoor recreation, and so much of that is on public lands, even the ski areas are on Forest Service land for the most part, generates $9.5 billion in Utah's economy and nearly 72,000 jobs. Why would you intentionally go mess that up to save a few thousand damn dollars? It's just stupid. So people need to know this is going on. They need to know they could lose access to these places, and they need to personally get involved, even if, and I don't mean just, but even if what they do is call their representative and senator and say, don't even think about getting rid of my land. And so that's the best thing we can do, and spread the word and get people understanding what the true story of their public lands are.
Thanks for your time today, Walt. We'll have to touch bases down the road to see if we're having any effect swaying Congress away from those ideas.
Enjoyed it. Take care.
That's our show. We hope you found it informative. To learn more about what's at stake when it comes to the federal lands you own, visit Walt's website, americaspublicland.com, and spend some time digesting its contents. And then call your congressional delegation. For The Traveler, this is Kurt Repenschek. See you in the parks.
The composers and musicians at Orange Tree Productions have created a unique collection known as the National Park Series that has grown to include more than 30 CD titles. Composed against the backdrop of a park's sounds of nature, these musical scores will connect you with these beautiful places and take you there, at least in your mind. This collection is the #1 selling National Park audio series in the world and provides the background music for National Parks Travelers podcasts. Visit them at orangetreeproductions.com. Editing and production work for the National Parks Traveler podcast is done by Splitbeard Productions. You can learn more about us at splitbeardproductions.com. National Parks Traveler is a 501c3 nonprofit media organization that provides daily editorial coverage of national parks and protected areas. Traveler's coverage is made possible by reader and listener donations. Visit us at nationalparkstraveler.org.